Good morning, everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining me this morning. Do bear with me while I get set up over here. But whilst I'm doing that, why not everyone tell me how you're doing and what you've been up to this week, how your week has gone. It has been a bit of, I wouldn't say exciting week. I mean, lots of things have been happening in the sense that, like, obviously, our numbers are going up again. Here in Malaysia, so yeah, just lots of things to watch out for. So yeah, while I'm getting set up, do leave me a comment on this live stream. Let me know where you're tuning in from, how your week has gone, what you have been up to this week, whilst we wait for a few other people to join us. Some updates, I guess. So as a result of the numbers kind of going up here in Malaysia this week, I think the last report from yesterday was 300 and something. So people are being very cautious, including us here at Kechara Forest Retreat. So as a result of the recent spike in new cases, we've unfortunately had to cancel/postpone the monthly Pets Day Out event, which was actually meant to be held today. So little secret, I was actually supposed to pre-record this video and then release it this morning because I was due to do the pastor's blessings for the Pets Day Out. But since the Pets Day Out is cancelled, so you guys have me here live. But yeah, so that's been cancelled for this month. Hopefully by next month, the figures will have gone down again so that it's safe for everyone to, bring their pets over to KFR or to travel interstate. We are, trying to do our part to keep the numbers down. And also Sunday classes in Kechara House in Petaling Jaya in town have also been cancelled. And Spiritual Saturday has also been cancelled. So a lot of cancellations. What other things have been happening? I went for Kechara Soup Kitchen rounds last night, the midnight rounds. So I went down to KL to take part in that, and it was a different experience from what I have witnessed or observed previously. I wrote about it on my Instagram and on my Facebook, but in brief, far fewer. There's a lot less traffic on the streets. That's one, because everyone's staying home due to the current pandemic, which is good. Okay, but there are also far fewer volunteers, which means that the workload is being spread over fewer people, so each person's having to handle more. Also, contributions and donations are down as people kind of work on their personal finances, and the manner in which the homeless clients are served has also changed. Instead of everyone queuing up, now everyone's socially distanced. The homeless are asked to sanitize their hands before they receive the food, and all the food and other items which are offered to them are put in a tray, and then it's delivered that way. So there's no contact, minimizing contact. So that's been what's changed with Kechara Soup Kitchen. So I'm going to be there again next weekend. So if you guys do have the time, please come and help out. If you take the necessary precautions and you don't take unnecessary risks, you mask up, you sanitize and you keep yourself clean, you shower as soon as you get home, you remain socially distant from everyone, including the volunteers, you'll be able to keep yourself safe. Alright, so if you can, please sign up as a volunteer with Kechara Soup Kitchen, or indeed any soup kitchen where you are. Final thing to let you guys know, I'm sure you've already all received the announcements, which is the upcoming Sem Rinpoche Mantra Retreat that will be taking place on the 29th to the 31st of October, which is fantastic because 31st is actually Halloween, which is, as all of you know, our Guru, His Eminence Sem Tugu Rinpoche's favorite holiday of the year. So yeah, it falls right on Halloween. I think I might have been the first person to sign up. I was actually driving at the time when I got the announcement. And as soon as I got the announcement, I pulled over and I quickly submitted my registration because I know that spaces are very limited. So I wanted to make sure that I got a place. So I've signed up for that. And that'll be on the 29th to the 31st. So if you guys have an opportunity, please do sign up, all right? Good morning, everyone. 12 people tuning in. So, All right, so that is happening. And contact the front desk for more information, for more details, and also to register your name. Why are we doing the San Rinpoche Mantra Retreat? We're doing it because it's to generate the merits and to create the courses to clear obstacles for the smooth completion of the Relic Stupa project, and also on a personal basis for students to forge and to foster and to build a much closer connection with Rinpoche, the 25th incarnation of San Rinpoche, as well as the future incarnations of San Rinpoche, all right? So I can't wait to do this, just to sit for 3 days and just focus purely on accumulating as many recitations of Rinpoche's mantra as possible. So yes, if you guys do try and make the time, all right? Out of all the mantras that we can recite, the most powerful mantra, if we want to clear obstacles, if we want to purify our karma, if we want to generate merit, the most powerful mantra out of everything is reciting our Guru's name mantra with full faith and belief, all right? So extremely powerful retreat to get involved with. Before we continue with today's session, I'm going to do a quick prayer as usual to ascribe the source of the information and the knowledge that's going to be shared today. I go for refuge in my Lama, from whom I've received these teachings. I go for refuge in the lineage Lamas, from whom my Lamas received these teachings. All right, thank you everyone for joining me today, and I hope that you guys have had a good weekend so far. And if you joined in JP's Mindful Morning Meditation session, which resumed this weekend, hope you had a good session. All right, so last week I talked about boredom, and the reason why I talked about boredom last week is because that's a emotion quality experience that many of us went through, and many of us are still going through, and many of us will continue to go through as time passes, regardless of whether there's a pandemic and we are required to stay home or whatever. All right. The other reason why I also talked about boredom last week is because many of us want to do retreats, and if you have ever done a short retreat, like the short retreat that's coming up, you may find your mind unfocused or wandering about all over the place, and maybe boredom coming to the forefront of your thoughts. So how we can effectively and constructively approach and deal with boredom is a very, very useful tool or skill for us to have. All right. So just a quick recap. The last week I touched on how boredom isn't linked to the size or the space that we're in, or what activity that we're doing at the time. For example, people can be in a 900 square foot apartment in lockdown, or they can be in Kechara Forest Retreat on 35 acres in lockdown, and they can still be bored, they can still experience cabin fever and all of the rest of that. So boredom isn't linked to the size or the space that we're in, and it's also not linked to the activity that we're doing. And that boredom, that being said, it demonstrates how boredom is actually how it arises from our mind. So being that it's something that arises from our mind, trying to find an external solution which will satiate our boredom, it won't work. It won't be effective. It will be like the example that's commonly given. It will be like trying to quench our thirst by drinking salt water or seawater. The only thing that we're going to do by trying to look for external solutions to deal with our internal experience of boredom is not going to be effective. So whilst we may find that we can deal with our boredom in the beginning by, for example, mindlessly scrolling through the internet or social media or whatever, or consuming as much news as possible, it may work at the beginning, but the question that all of us need to think about is, where does it end? Because it's a never-ending cycle. So boredom, I talked about last week, also arises from our tendency to label things as pleasant and unpleasant, and that boredom arises when there is an absence of this experience, especially in the absence of the oscillation or the change between these experiences. So we are taught from a young age that to feel alive and to feel effective, or to feel that we are moving through life, or that we are living life to its fullest, that we should swing wildly from the extremes of pleasant experiences to the extremes of unpleasant experiences. So the excitement of something pleasant to the depression of something unpleasant. And boredom arises when there's this absence of emotional volatility. So when we talk about dealing with boredom, we're talking about how we want to deal with this emotional volatility, and how this emotional volatility affects our practice and influences our practice, as well as our relationships with other people. All right, so that was what I spoke about last week. Good morning, Gillian. Good morning, Joyce. Hi, Ainin. Hello, Sukpan. I see the entire meditation cruise here. Thank you guys for joining from JP this morning. Hi, Aggie. Nice to meet you. And hi, Iman. Thank you for joining us this morning. All right. So before I go on into today's topic, which is the topic of judgment, just want to shoot a quick reminder to you guys that if you would like to sponsor any of our talks, not just mine, but any of the other ones, Pastor Nero's, Pastor David's, JP's, and so on, you can do so at the link which I've put in the description section of this video, all right? Because your contributions do help us to continue to make these online programs possible. All right, so yes, this week what I wanted to do was I wanted to touch on a topic that many of us do unconsciously, that many of us do automatically, that many of us do habitually, and that is to sit in judgment. And I've raised, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about judgment this week was because it's something that I had raised in previous couple of weeks' talks. I think I might have skimmed over it or mentioned it in brief, in the context of how it would not be helpful for us to judge ourselves as being good or bad people on the basis of the fact that we experience regret, or the basis that we experience disappointment and jealousy and anger and so on. All right, so in those weeks I talked about how it would be good for us to approach things as neutrally as possible, without judging ourselves as being good or bad, because our habituations and our tendencies are not an inherent or permanent part of us. And this is something that Rinpoche had often emphasized with us, which is that our anger, our jealousy, our anxiety, our disappointments, our bitterness, our envy, and so on, all of these emotions are not an inherent part of us, and they are not permanently part of us. So for us to think that, oh, because I am always angry, or because I'm always jealous, or because I have so many regrets, for us to think of ourselves in that way, it's an insidious form of laziness, in the sense that, well, because I'm like that, therefore I have no hope of changing. Since I have no hope of changing, therefore I should not apply any effort to my practice. But the thing is, through the existence of Buddhas, taking rebirth in the form of our teachers, we know that it is possible, by applying our practice, that there is a state beyond the spiritual state that we're in at the moment. All right, it is possible to progress. It is possible to move on. So, being that we can do something to change all these experiences and emotions and qualities that we temporarily or presently possess, it doesn't make us bad people. All right. Having these emotions and having these qualities don't make us bad people. Okay, so being that that is the way that we are at the moment, the question then we should ask is, when we approach our practice, how can we approach our practice wisely? How can we approach our practice constructively? How can we approach our practice free from judgment of ourselves? And so how and why would it be helpful for us to recognize what judgment is, and to be able to redirect that energy of judgment and to adapt it into something that's useful for our practice? So remember, I think last week I had talked about how boredom is an energy, and so if we recognize boredom as being an energy, boredom becomes an energy that we can then redirect towards something else. So for example, if you look at the example of kids, and when children are bored, they pick up things and then they drop it here and there. But when children are bored and they find a goal, or they find something, or they find a purpose and something that they can focus on, for example, completing a Lego project, that energy can then be redirected into a result. That energy can then be redirected into something that they can accomplish or achieve. All right, so the question that we are dealing with today, the topic that we're dealing with today, is the topic of judgment, and how we can redirect that energy of judgment into something that's positive, something that's constructive towards our practice. All right, so before we go on, then we talk about what is judgment first of all, and how do we define judgment. All right, and so a common mistake, or rather a common habit of ours, is to assume that all judgment is bad, which ironically is in itself a judgment. All right, so to better understand judgment, it would be helpful for us to first of all talk about discernment, the difference between discernment and judgment, so that we can understand how judgment is beneficial to our is not beneficial to our practice, and how developing discernment would be more beneficial to our practice. Discernment is perceiving things the way that they are, and it ends there. Okay, so discernment is perceiving something the way that it is, and that's it, full stop, period. All right, it's perception. Discernment is the act of perception in the absence of judgment, where you don't move beyond that. Therefore, judgment is when you have discernment and then you add expectations and you add preferences and you add your projections on top of it. So as we say in Malaysia, tambah kuah, right? So you keep adding gravy to your meal to try and make it tastier. Okay, so discernment is perception in the absence of judgment, and it's perceiving things the way they are. Judgment is discernment with the addition of expectations, with the addition of preferences, and with the addition of projecting those expectations and preferences onto a situation or onto an event. So when you judge something, whether it's directly or indirectly, whether it's implicitly or explicitly, what you're doing is that you're making a comparison between how things and how people are with how you expect them to be, or how you think they ought to be, or how you think that they're supposed to be. So an example that may help all of us to understand that difference or that distinction a little better is, for example, when you go home during Chinese New Year in Malaysia, or let's say in a more Western context, if you go home during Thanksgiving, and then your family goes, "Wow, so old already, ah? How come don't have boyfriend? How come not married yet?" Or, you see the neighbor's son, already 33, already vice president of his company. How come you're not vice president of your company? All right, so in that instance, what you're supposed to do or what you ought to do is, by a certain age, you ought to be married. You're supposed to be married. And so the comparison comes when you are not married at a certain age, and you don't have a partner at a certain age, and so the judgment comes at that point where this is the way that you are, and this is what someone has perceived that you ought or you're supposed to be. Okay, so from that, what we can take away from that is that when we engage in judging, there is an element of dissatisfaction in that interaction. The dissatisfaction with the way that things are, as well as a desire with the way that we want things to be. Okay, so another example to help us to understand the distinction between judgment and discernment. Judgment is, for example, when a judge is presiding over court proceedings and then comes down with a final verdict of guilty versus innocent. Discernment, on the other hand, is when our music teacher observes us playing on the piano and then gives us feedback about our technique, gives us feedback about how much practice we've done, and gives us feedback on how we can improve. So the music teacher is not giving us a final verdict on our ability or our potential as an artist, but the music teacher is giving us feedback on how we can improve. The music teacher is also not giving us feedback or not judging us as a person, but purely on the skill or purely on the act or purely on the action. All right. So the teacher focuses on the actions, and the teacher looks for a way to help us to keep improving, to help us to become better, to help us to reach higher standards. All right. Another example, a more day-to-day example, if you want to call it that, to help us to understand the distinction between judgment and discernment is, for example, if you have a friend who's always eating out. So the sentence, this person A is always going out to eat. If you say that sentence, person A is always going out to eat. Let's say, excuse me, for the sake of simplicity, let's say, Emily is always going out to eat. If you say Emily is always going out to eat, but you say it with a neutral tone, what you're doing is you're just observing and you're just describing the way that things are. Emily is always going out to eat. That's it, right? Now, that's discernment. Judgment, on the other hand, is if you say the same sentence, but you say it with a negative tone, or you say it with an element of dissatisfaction. So, Emily is always going out to eat. So what you're trying to imply there is that Emily's always going out to eat, but she shouldn't be always going out to eat. Emily should be staying home. Emily should be cooking at home. Emily shouldn't be spending so much money. Emily should be more thrifty with her spending. Emily should be have more focus on healthy cooking. Emily shouldn't eat out as much. So the same sentence, but when you apply judgment to it, has an element of dissatisfaction. Whereas if you are purely discerning the situation, which is purely observing and purely describing the situation, Emily's always going out to eat. Said in a neutral tone, that is what discernment is. All right? So I hope I made myself clear. Now, good morning, Xiao Li. Good morning, Brian. Hi, Joyce. Yes, I am burning incense, Joyce. I am burning some special incense which we got from Gandin, the Gandin in Tibet. And it's a special incense that is available through the flea market at Vajra Goods. I'm not sure if they still have stock available, but that is actually the incense that I'm burning at the moment. Good morning, Hannah. Hi, hope everything's okay in JB. Okay, so before we continue, I'm going to talk also now about some truths about judging. And before I talk about how judging affects our spiritual practice, I'm going to talk about some truth about judging. So some of you may be thinking, well, why can't I judge? Why am I not in a position to judge? Why can't I judge other people? Why can't I judge myself? All right, so how I'm going to answer that is I'm going to answer that on the basis of Buddha Shakyamuni's teachings and 3 truths that Buddha Shakyamuni taught about judgment. And please forgive me because I have trouble pronouncing the word truths. Sometimes comes out kind of jumbled. All right, so the first truth that Buddha Shakyamuni taught about judging is that we can't judge because we can't really trust ourselves to see through our delusions on our own. All right, why? Because when you are deluded, you don't know that you're deluded, and you think that everything's okay, and you don't think that you're deluded. All right, so because when you're deluded and you don't know that you're deluded and you think that you're not deluded, in this instance, you need a trustworthy friend to help to point things out to you. All right, so Shakyamuni actually advised this to his son Rahula. And Shakyamuni advised to Rahula that he should examine his own mind as he examine his own actions as he would his face in a mirror. And if Rahula saw that his actions had caused harm, then he should talk it over with a knowledgeable friend on the path. And as we all know, a knowledgeable friend on the path is our teacher, is our guru. We may not necessarily have access to a guru or a teacher at the time, so perhaps we can also talk about it together with our Dharma brothers and sisters. All right? What is so important about talking things over with a knowledgeable friend on the path? If we really want to become skillful with our body, speech and mind, we need someone, we need a third party, we need an outside observer to point out to us our blind spots. And our blind spots are usually centered around our unskillful habits. So the habits that we currently, temporarily possess, which continue to cause harm for ourselves and to cause harm to other people, cause suffering to ourselves and to other people, all right? So when you talk to a knowledgeable friend on the path, you talk to your guru or you talk to a Dharma brother and sister, you're learning how to be open with other people, you're learning how to be open with yourself about your mistakes. And at the same time, you're also tapping into the knowledge and the experience and the wisdom that your friend will possess. Okay, so the main duty of a trustworthy friend, therefore, the main duty of a teacher, the main duty of a Dharma brother and sister is to compassionately point out our faults so that we have an opportunity to correct them. And if you think that this is something that is purely exclusive to Buddhism, it's not. Because if, for example, you join a group like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, if you join a 12-step program, the first step in a 12-step program is actually recognizing that you have a problem. And sometimes when we're unable to recognize a problem or unable to recognize that we have a problem or we have something that we need to overcome, it will be good for us to talk to a knowledgeable friend, to talk to a third party who will be able to point out these blind spots to us. Point out these blind spots which are around our unskillful habits, all right? So when you actually correct these blind spots, when you actually correct these unskillful habits that you have, therefore, then it's at that point that you actually benefit from your friend's compassion to point these things out to you. Now, when you ask your friend, where is it that I have these blind spots? What kind of attitude should we have when we are trying to maintain an admirable friend, a trustworthy friend? What kind of attitude should we have when we are trying to make the best out of this question, out of this interaction that we're having with our friend? I can answer that by pointing out to you the importance of remaining open, the importance of remaining honest through the vows. It actually says in the vows, do not make yourself somebody who cannot be addressed. Make yourself somebody who can be addressed. Make yourself somebody who is open to receiving feedback, whether it's feedback that's delivered harshly or what we perceive to be harsh, or feedback in a manner that's delivered in what we perceive to be soft. All right, so when you ask somebody for feedback so that you can improve, so that you can do things differently, ask it with the intent that you want to be as open as possible to receiving this feedback. So the first truth about why we are not in a position to judge is that we ourselves are not in a position to see through our own delusions. And when you're deluded, you don't know that you're deluded, all right? No, so when you are deluded and you don't know that you're deluded, that brings us to the importance of relying on an admirable friend or relying on a trustworthy friend. But then you might come to the question, well, since I'm deluded, how do I know who's admirable or who is not? All right, and that brings us to the second truth of what Buddha taught, which is that we should be careful of who we trust. When I say be careful of who we trust, I don't mean be totally paranoid and be like, eyes wide open and be like, oh my God, everybody's out to get me, or is this person out to exploit me? I'm not talking about paranoia in that way. What I'm talking about is that we should recognize that our judgment, or the power of our judgment, it does have power. Our judgment does have power, because that power lies in the fact that if we judge correctly or incorrectly, it can cause us long-term harm or it can cause us long-term benefit. So we should take care in choosing our admirable friend, our trustworthy friend, our knowledgeable friend. The example that Rinpoche gave before is the example of Angulimala. So Angulimala at the time was unable to discern that his first guru before Shakyamuni was not such a fantastic guru, because this guru advised him that if you cut off the index finger of 1,000 people and string them in a mala around your neck, that you will gain enlightenment. All right, so that is an example to show us the importance of being able to, or of being careful of who we trust. At the same time as how we should be careful of who we trust, it would be good for us not to fall into the easy trap of being non-judgmental, as well as being judgmental, actually. All right, so I'm very glad, Aggie, that you're finding this talk helpful. Stay tuned to the end, because I actually talk about how to effectively redirect judgment. All right. So yes, at the same time, we shouldn't fall into the easy trap of being judgmental or non-judgmental. So judgmental in trusting our immediate knee-jerk likes and dislikes. So you see someone, immediately think, oh, I don't like that person, right? So don't fall into the trap of saying, well, since I should be careful who I trust, I don't like that person, I don't want to get close to that person, or I like that person and I'm going to go for that person. Don't fall into that trap. Also, don't fall into the trap of being so non-judgmental that every teacher that comes along, or every person that comes along, or every friend that comes along, you assume will be equally beneficial as a guide, or equally beneficial as a teacher. All right. The key for us to be able to strike a balance between judgmental and being non-judgmental is practicing discernment. Being discerning in choosing which person whose knowledge and whose advice we take, or whose guidance we can take on as our own. How can we be discerning if we're deluded and we can't see through our delusions, and if we are unable to be discerning at this time, and if we need to be careful who we trust? How can we be discerning if we are facing all of those obstacles, or all of those challenges rather? How we can be discerning is by relying on texts such as the 50 verses of Guru Devotion. Why do we rely on the 50 verses of Guru devotion? That leads us to the third truth that Buddha Shakyamuni taught, and that is we can't be a fair judge of other people's integrity until we have developed some integrity of our own, or we can't be a fair judge of other people's qualities until we have developed some of those qualities of our own. Because when we haven't developed, if we haven't developed discernment, and if we can't trust ourselves to guide ourselves through our delusions, then we will need something that will give us guidelines for what we can look out for and what we can aim to avoid. So that's why we have vows. We have vows because vows make it clear for us about what is virtuous activity and what is non-virtuous activity. Vows, by holding vows, it helps us to more easily distinguish or more easily discern the difference between virtuous activity and non-virtuous activity. That's why we have texts like the 50 verses of Guru devotion, because texts like that give us guidelines for helping us to discern what is an appropriate object of refuge versus who is somebody whose opinions and knowledge we should take with a pinch of salt. Alright? So, vows, texts, things like that, these guidelines, they help us to discern without judging. Out of the three truths that the Buddha taught, the first being that we're not in a position to judge because we can't see through our own delusions, that we need to be careful who we trust. This third truth, which is that we can't be a judge of other people's integrity or qualities until we have developed some of our own. This third truth, three T's, so difficult to pronounce, but this third truth is the most uncomfortable of all because it requires us to accept responsibility for our decisions and for our actions. When you want to discern between virtuous activity and non-virtuous activity and you want to commit to that, you need to take responsibility for the fact that you're going to take on vows. When you want to find a guru, you need to take on responsibility for the fact that you're going to follow the 50 verses of Guru devotion and you need to commit to it all the way. Alright? And as we all know, we are not particularly fantastic at committing, and we're all not particularly fantastic at accepting responsibility for actions and decisions. So that is why this third truth is the most uncomfortable out of all three. So it's about making the decision to follow these guidelines and to commit to them. Not just commit to them verbally, but also commit to putting them to action or putting them into practice. Alright? So then you might be thinking, well, Pastor Jinai, since we're already deluded, and since we don't know that we're deluded, and since we can't see through our delusions, and since we need to be careful about who we trust, how therefore can we trust that the vows will lead us to a good place? How therefore can we trust that the 50 verses of Guru devotion will help us to discern between what's an appropriate spiritual guide and what is not an appropriate spiritual guide? How can we do that? You can do that if you can't trust your own judgment in how these things will benefit. You can do that by looking at the people who came before us. Not just people who came before us, but people who came before us and put these guidelines into practice. And you can see where they came from and where they are now. So you can look at, for example, old lamas, and you can look at how the old lamas have practiced for many years and have held their vows for many years, and where they were at the beginning of the practice versus where they are now, 80 years later. You can look at Dharma students, Dharma brothers and sisters around you. Look at where they were when they first started, when they first entered your organization, and how they have held the 50 verses of Guru devotion, and so how they've held it over the years, and so where they started and where they are now. And then you can see, with that evidence right in front of you, the benefit of committing, the benefit of putting these guidelines into practice, putting these guidelines of discernment into practice. Alright? So, before I continue, cripes, thirsty. I'm talking pretty fast today because we have a fair amount to get through, and as you guys know, if you join me regularly, I'm not the best at timekeeping, alright? So, let's move on. So, now that I've talked about the difference between judgment and discernment in order to help everyone understand what judgment is, and I've also talked about why we may not necessarily be in a position to judge, I also want to talk about why judgment is also not necessarily helpful to our practice. Oh, excuse me. So, why not just judge away? Why not just sit on the internet all day and look at everyone's posts and judge them over and over again? Why not turn on the news and look at all of the newsreels and judge everybody over and over again? Why not, I don't know, turn on Netflix, flip through a magazine and judge everyone? Why not read a book and judge? Just judge the whole day. All right. So why not just do that? Why not just keep reinforcing our habituation to judge, since we already had the habituation anyway, right? I just want to remind you guys that when I talk about how judgment is not necessarily helpful to ourselves, I'm not asking you to actually judge yourself, because what I'm asking us to, and this is a reminder for all of us, what I'm asking us to do is to discern whether our habit will be beneficial or add to our practice, or whether our habit will be detrimental to our practice overall. All right? I'm not asking us to judge our habit of judging as being good or bad. I'm not asking us to judge ourselves as being good or bad people. I know that judgment is a quality or a habit that's very difficult to overcome, because it is an automatic reaction. I like this, I don't like that. I like this person, I don't like that person. I like this situation, I don't like that situation. And we make what is called snap judgments. All right? And it's what we're used to. And it's so well ingrained in us that when we judge something, oftentimes it's a response that we're not even aware that we're making. We're not even aware of this reaction, all right? So what I'm asking us to do is that as we investigate or look into why judgment may not necessarily be beneficial or helpful to our practice, I'm asking us to try and suspend momentarily our habituation of judgment. So why not just judge away? Why is judgment not necessarily beneficial for our practice? First of all, judgment is an act of reinforcing our dissatisfaction. And as the Buddha taught about suffering, one of the types of suffering is all-pervasive suffering, which is dissatisfaction. Since we are in the practice of Buddhism to try to uproot our dissatisfaction, it does not make sense and is not logical, therefore, to keep engaging in acts which reinforce our dissatisfaction, because it means that all the time that we then spend trying to engage in practice or trying to actually consciously practice, we then undo when we are not aware, when we're not conscious, and when we keep engaging in judgment, when we keep putting ourselves in situations where we feel the urge to judge. All right? So first thing, why it is not necessarily beneficial for us to keep judging away is because judgment is a reinforcement of our dissatisfaction, which in our practice we are already trying to uproot. Second, judgment reinforces our attachment, and judgment also reinforces our dual way of thinking. In particular, it reinforces our perception of what is right and what is not right. It reinforces our perception of what is good and not good. It reinforces our perception of what is acceptable, not acceptable, and our perception of what we like and what we don't like. And what we need to do is we need to recognize that our perception of what is right and wrong, what is good or bad, what is acceptable, not acceptable, is not always correct and not always accurate to a situation. How do we know that it's not always accurate or correct to a situation, or applicable to a situation rather? It's because not everyone shares the same perceptions as us. For example, people who know more than us, or people who are more experienced than us, as well as people who know less than us and people who are less experienced than us, their perception of a situation or an event or of someone else may be totally different. We can sit in a room and 10 of us can sit in a room and all of us look at this cup. 10 people, the likelihood that 10 people will have different opinions about the cup is pretty high. The likelihood that 5 people will like the cup and 5 people won't like the cup and 5 people think I should use a different cup that has DS's mantra on it or whatever is pretty high, right? So the fact that all of us have different opinions and different conclusions and different perceptions of things and different preferences of things goes to show that how we perceive a situation, or how we perceive something to be right or wrong or good or bad or acceptable or not acceptable is not always necessarily accurate or correct or appropriate or relevant to a situation. If it was, it would mean that all of us, the fact that we all don't judge or perceive in the same way demonstrates that how we judge or how we see things is not according to reality. It's not according to an ultimate truth. Because if it was, all of us would come to the same conclusion. If you would like an example of what an ultimate truth is, an ultimate truth is something like, for example, karma. No matter what you put up against karma, if you measure something or you match something or compare something against the laws of karma, it will always come up with the same conclusion. A plus B will equal C. A plus B with an addition of C will equal D, for example. It's not in that linear way, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to get at, which is that karma is irrefutable. Karma applies to everyone, regardless of their race, regardless of their background, regardless of their upbringing, their socio-economic status, and so on. Another ultimate truth is, for example, ultimate truth in our world, okay? Not in other worlds, because various factors and variables will differ there. But for example, to help you understand this a bit better, gravity. There are certain laws of gravity which are immutable. So because it doesn't matter where on planet Earth you are. If you drop an apple, the apple will fall to the ground. All right. If you change a variable in that law, then yes, the apple may do something different. But gravity has certain immutable laws. And so if you judge something according to the law of gravity, there is a predictable outcome. Karma, as an ultimate truth, applies across the board, not just on planet Earth, but across dimensions, across realities, across universes, and so on. I'm not going to get into that today, but that is an example of what an ultimate truth is, which is that no matter what you put up against it, it will come to the same conclusion, it will come to the same result. And so that's how you can understand that our perceptions are not necessarily according to ultimate truth or according to reality, is because if you put 10 people in the same room observing one situation, you may actually come up with 10 different results or 10 different opinions, all right? Our judgments and our perceptions are influenced by our upbringing. They are influenced by our preferences. They are influenced by our habituations, which we have developed over many lifetimes. And ultimately, they are influenced by our delusions and our ignorance. All right. So we need to recognize that judgment is based on our reaction to think about things according to what we like and what we don't like. And these things that we like and what we don't like are very personal to us, not necessarily shared by everyone else, all right, or anyone else for that matter. All right, so when we judge, what we're doing is that we are constantly reinforcing our attachments and constantly reinforcing our dual way of thinking of good, bad, acceptable, not acceptable, like, don't like. Why are we trying to avoid judgment, which reinforces our attachments or reinforces our dual way of thinking? Because when you judge and you reinforce this habituation of attachment, or you reinforce your attachments rather, it's a habit that can then spill over to other aspects of your life. It's not contained, it's not exclusive to one particular area or field or aspect of your life, all right? So, the example that Rimshi gave is that we can start from something small. For example, I like this food, I don't like that food. I like this shirt, I don't like that shirt. I like this car, I don't like that car. And then from there, that I like, don't like, don't like, that habit can become so reinforced that it then grows and spills over into something else, into something bigger. So for example, I'll help that person if they're nice to me, but I won't help that person because they were rude to me previously. So that's an escalation of I like this food, I don't like that food. Then it can grow from there. So from I like this food, I don't like this food, it grows to I like this, I'll help this person because I like this person, I won't help that person because they were rude to me last time. Then it grows from there. It can spill over then to, I like it when my guru does this, I don't like it when my guru does that. I have faith in my guru when he talks or behaves in this way. I don't have faith in my guru when he talks and behaves in this way. So then doubt arises in our teacher. Wrong view arises. So from that you can see that something so small or so minor or apparently seemingly insignificant can, if it's reinforced enough, can then grow and can then escalate into something that's bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until finally it becomes something which is truly terrible, which is I like it when my guru says this, and I will have faith in my teacher when he says this, and I won't have faith in my teacher when he says this. Alright, so it can actually escalate, it can actually become much bigger than what we originally started out to be. So that is one of the reasons why it is important for us to deal with judgment, to transform our judgment into discernment, because we don't want small acts of judgment to escalate into something bigger. All right? So when we engage in judgment and we are reinforcing this attachment and reinforcing this dual way of thinking, we are also reinforcing our habituation to guide our lives according to the 8 worldly dharmas. So being happy if comfortable, being unhappy if not, being happy if praised, being happy if criticized, being happy if famous, being unhappy if not, being happy if you acquire, being unhappy if you don't. All right? And again, as I've mentioned in many previous talks, the 8 worldly dharmas is something that we're trying to get away from. Okay? Then, why is it also not helpful to judge or to engage in the act of judging? I've already talked about how it's a reinforcement of our dissatisfaction and it's a reinforcement of our attachments. It is also not helpful for us to judge because judgment is a recipe for unhappiness. Think of all the people that you know who are constantly judging. Do they look and sound like happy people? I'm not asking you to judge them, I'm asking you to observe. Okay? So do they look and sound like they're happy people? Do those people who are always judging look and sound like happy people? What kind of energy do these people give off? Is it a happy kind of energy, or is it something else? And like I said, when I say think of all people, or think of all the people who you know who are always judging, I'm asking you to observe, I'm asking you to understand the results of their decision to judge. I'm not asking you to judge them as being good or bad. Alright, so think, do they look or sound like happy people? Do they give off an energy that's happy, or do they give off an energy that's dissatisfied? And then think also how you feel when you judge. When you are engaging in the act of judgment, a conscious act of judgment. Okay, so look at that girl, what dress is she wearing? Do you feel light when you're judging someone? Do you feel happy when you're judging someone? Do you feel satisfied when you're judging someone? And I know when I say, do you feel satisfied when you're judging somebody? Some people, some of you may think, well, yeah, I do feel satisfied when I'm judging someone. All right, but while it may feel satisfying in the act of judging somebody at that time, how do you feel afterwards? Does the feeling of satisfaction continue? Or do you sit and think later, actually, I shouldn't have really talked like that. I shouldn't have really expressed my opinions in that way. The person didn't really do anything to me. They didn't deserve for me to talk that way. So how do you feel after judging? And then think the next step. How do you feel when you judge yourself? Do you feel happy when you judge yourself? Do you feel light when you judge yourself? Do you feel good when you judge yourself? Or do you feel down? Do you feel like crap? Do you feel like horrible and heavy when you judge yourself? So, if that is the result of judging, and that's the energy that you're going to give off to other people around you, and that's the way you feel when you judge, that also means then that another result of judging, and why it's not helpful for us to judge, is that not only is judging a recipe for unhappiness, but judging is also a recipe for loneliness. So again, think of all the people who you see judging others, and always judging others. Or better yet, with all due respect, think of old people that you see, senior people that you see who are always judging other people. They are judging their friends. They are you know what, she should wear more age-appropriate clothing. She shouldn't dye her hair. Why is she always going on holiday? Okay? Think of people who are always judging their grandkids. You know what? The neighbor's son, he bought a new car last week. What happened to you? Okay? Think about people who are always judging their children. Hey, where are my grandkids? How come I don't have any grandkids here? How come you don't have a girlfriend? How come you can't get married yet? Okay? Think about people who are always judging other people's grandchildren. He's only an accountant. My grandson is a doctor. Okay? So think of all the old people like that. Are those the type of people that we like to be around? Are we around them because there's a sense of obligation to them, or are we around them because we genuinely enjoy being around them? Now, I'm not asking you to judge them again as being good or bad. I'm just asking you to discern. Why I'm asking you to discern and to observe is because if we feel not that fantastic when we're hanging around people like that, what we feel not fantastic around is actually the results of judging over 10, 20, 30 years, and the results of reinforcing that habituation of judgment over 10, 20, 30 years. So, then we need to think, what is it that we're doing now that's creating the causes for us to become the same people later that we dislike at the moment? All right, those people that we find or we perceive to be difficult to be around, they were us 10, 20, 30 years ago, except they did not have the benefit, or they did not have the opportunity. They did not have the opportunity for someone to say, hey, perhaps it's not that helpful for you to keep reinforcing your habituation of judgment over and over again. But since we do have the opportunity in the form of our guru, who kindly points out to us that judgment is not such a fantastic habituation to reinforce, we have an opportunity to do something about it before it gets to that stage. All right. So when you see or when you observe people like that, think about how you feel. And when you think about how you feel, and perhaps sometimes their habits create a little bit of reluctance in you to want to be around them so much, and you keep a distance a little bit. Think, what am I doing at the moment that creates the causes for me to become somebody like that later? Using that person as an inspiration, therefore, it helps use that person as an inspiration, therefore, for our own practice. All right. Maybe. Okay. So putting all this together, that judgment reinforces our dissatisfaction. Judgment reinforces our attachment. Judgment is a recipe for unhappiness. Judgment is a recipe for loneliness. Judgment, therefore, also is a recipe for us to more suffering, not just now, but in the future as well. When you judge, your attachments grow, your desires grow, your expectations grow. And as we know, Buddha taught that attachment, desires, and expectations are the basis for suffering. If a scriptural example like that doesn't convince you that judgment is a recipe for suffering, then think that when you judge, your disappointment also grows, your bitterness also grows, your dissatisfaction with things and people and situations and events around you also grow when you're constantly judging. Okay, so if that helps you to understand why judgment is not particularly helpful, because attachment, desire, and expectations may be too abstract of a concept for some of us to grapple with at this time, then think that if you're always judging, it's a recipe for suffering, because our disappointments will grow, our dissatisfaction with everything around us will grow, and our bitterness and our anger and our jealousy and our envy, all of these things will grow if we're constantly judging and comparing how things are to how we think things ought to be, or how we think things are supposed to be. Okay, so what happens then is that when you keep judging and you keep reinforcing your judgment, you keep reinforcing the habituation of judgment, everywhere you look, nothing will satisfy you. Everything will dissatisfy you. And I'm not talking about it in the way of Prince Siddhartha, where Prince Siddhartha looked around and thought, no, there's more to life than this. I'm not talking about that kind of dissatisfaction. I'm talking about the dissatisfaction that arises from our judgment and our comparison of how we think things should be. And when we think that things should be a certain way and they don't turn out to be a certain way and they don't conform to our idea of how they should be, that we then become disappointed, that we then become dissatisfied. All right. And so, yes, judgment and reinforcing our habituation of judgment also is a recipe for suffering, because it leads and it creates the causes for us to be very lonely. It creates the causes for people to not to want to be around us, because think, when you are with people who are always judging, do you like to be around them? Therefore, if you are always judging, will other people like to be around you? All right, so now that I've talked about all this unpleasant stuff about, oh my God, if you judge and if I don't get rid of my judgment, then I'm going to be unhappy, I'm going to be lonely, I'm going to be bitter, I'm going to be disappointed, I'm going to be dissatisfied, then what is the benefit of not judging? All right. Now, the reason why I want to talk about the benefit of not judging is because I want to offer this cautionary tale, which is that at the same time as us not judging, we should also aim to not be non-judgmental. And I'm going to say that again. I'm going to say it very slowly. At the same time as us trying to not judge, we should also aim to not be non-judgmental. What I'm talking about here is I'm talking about walking the middle path between the extremes of judgment and the extremes of non-judgment. When we try to not judge, there is a potential, potential that we may overcompensate and then swing the other way and lose all sense of discernment and be totally non-judgmental and be totally open to anything and everything that could come our way. All right. The cautionary tale I want to offer here is that we still do need to be discerning to make helpful choices, because we do need to be careful about who we trust, and that is why, again, we rely on guidelines like the vows and the 50 verses of Guru devotion to provide those guidelines. All right. But what happens when we don't judge? What happens when we don't judge? If judgment leads to loneliness, if judgment leads to people not wanting to be around us, therefore, not judging, I'm not saying non-judgmentalism, I'm saying not judging. So discerning opens us up, opens up the field of people who we can interact with. Why? Because when you judge somebody and when you judge a person, it reinforces your preferences of who you like and who you don't like. It reinforces your preferences of who you feel annoying and who you feel not annoying, who you feel irritating or who you feel not irritating, and so on. And as a result of judging, we then tend to shy away from people who we feel irritate us or who we feel annoy us or who we feel provoke us, and so on. And as I mentioned in a few previous talks, when you always shy away from people who you feel provoke you, irritate you, and so on, how do we develop spiritually? If we shut ourselves away in a cave and we do retreats for 10, 20, 30 years, then we come out and we say, oh, I've accomplished patience. It's easier to say that you've accomplished patience and you've achieved patience and you've realized patience when you've got no one to practice patience on. It's tougher to say that you've accomplished or realized patience when you have people testing your patience constantly. When you can be patient with the people who you perceive to be difficult and it's effortless, it's second nature, it's become part of who you are, then you've accomplished patience. All right, so as a result of judging, we don't hang out with people who we think are boring, although they may have knowledge to offer us. As a result of judging, we may not layan, or we may not entertain people who we feel are irritating or who we feel arrogant, even though those people may have the ability or the ability to benefit the Dharma in some way. Excuse me. When we judge someone and we don't hang out with people who annoy us, we may miss the opportunity to connect with somebody who may need our help. All right, so it doesn't mean that we have to hang out with everyone who annoys us and we have to hang out with everybody who irritates us and we have to hang out with everybody who bothers us. That is not the point of this at all. The point is that when we don't judge and we practice discernment instead, it gives us the option of hanging out with anybody that we like, because our judgment no longer stands in the way of us doing so. And when we do that, it feels good, it feels peaceful, because we let go of clinging to the thought that we have of the way that people are supposed to be. You feel open, you feel lighter, you feel that you have many more opportunities, many more avenues, because your attachment to how you think people are supposed to be or how you think people ought to be no longer stands in the way of you connecting with or interacting with other people. All right. You also become better at getting feedback when you stop judging, and you therefore have the opportunity to grow and improve. Just let me double check on time. I knew it. An hour. All right. I may have to cut this off sooner because I don't want to keep you guys. But you get better at taking feedback. And you get better, when you get better at taking feedback, therefore, you give yourself an opportunity to grow and to improve. Why? Because being judgmental closes us off to people who may have knowledge or who may have experience and who may have the wisdom that we need to move to the next level. Because you think, well, I don't like that person, and I don't like how they spoke to me, so I'm not going to listen to them. I don't like their tone of voice, so I'm not going to take into account what it is that they've said. Or rather, who are they to tell me what they think? Who are they to tell me how I should improve? Who are they to tell me that what I'm doing is wrong? Okay, so in the act of judgment, we have closed ourselves off from people who may have feedback and who may have knowledge to share with us that will help us to grow and help us to improve and will ultimately benefit us. sometimes people give feedback and we find reasons to judge someone and we find reasons to dislike a person because we don't want to listen to them, because if we don't listen to them, therefore we don't need to apply what it is that they have said. Oh, Christ. An hour, okay? When you're in that moment, recognize that it's your ego talking, and recognize that it's your ego getting defensive and your ego trying to protect something. So when you stop judging, you give yourself an opportunity to process feedback, or to process information as feedback and not as criticism. I've heard this repeated many times. I don't like the way that person talked to me, so I'm not going to do what it is that they're going to do. I'll give you a very personal example. Last year, I tore my ATFL. If I remember correctly, my anterior fibular something ligament. Anyway, it's in my ankle, and my ankle ended up swelling huge. So I went to see a doctor about it. At first, it was misdiagnosed as a sprained ankle. So after 3 months, nothing happened. So I went to see an actual doctor. As soon as I walked into the doctor's office, the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, you're overweight and that's why your ankle won't heal." And I was like, whoa, hang on, wait a minute, okay? And then he said, yeah, and then he explained, your ankle is this small and it's carrying this much weight. And so with all that weight bearing down on the ankle, any injury that you have on the ankle, therefore, won't heal as quickly because it's additional strain and additional pressure on the ankle. And I was sitting there kind of like, well, I don't like the way this doctor's talking to me. He shouldn't have said that. He should have delivered. He should have had a better bedside manner. And I thought, no, hang on. I'm taking offense to what he's saying, which is actually true. I just don't like the way that he delivered it. But what he's saying is actually true, and it is actually logical, and it does make sense. That when you are heavier, yes, it does make sense that you are putting more pressure on your ankle, which is this big. And so any injury that you have, therefore, will not heal as quickly. The next thing he said to me was, you should lose weight. And I was like, oh, hang on a minute. Again, defenses came up. And I was like, no, he's right. It would be beneficial for my ankle's healing to do that. So I made a concerted effort to ignore the tone and to ignore the delivery and focus on the fact that this man can heal my ankle. It's been 3 months, my ankle's swollen, it's not going on. And when I'm talking swollen, I'm not talking like slightly swollen, I'm talking like there's like a tennis ball attached to my ankle and there's no feeling, it's totally numb. This man can heal my ankle, I'm going to listen to him regardless of what he says. And I'm glad I stuck it out because in the end, my ankle did heal. The point I'm trying to tell you here is that when we make snap judgments and we go with our knee-jerk reaction of what we like and what we don't like, and we judge somebody on the basis of their tone, sometimes, there are times rather, it can stop us from accessing information and it can stop us from accessing knowledge, which can help us to improve and which can help us to heal, which can help us to get better, which can help us to raise our standards, all right? So what I'm going to do is, today, I'm going to end the talk here. I'm going to talk about how we can stop judging next week. Cliffhanger! All right, so I'm going to talk next week about how we can stop judging so that we don't run way over our time. And then next week I'll talk about that as well as maybe answer some questions that you guys may have. That'll give us an opportunity to have a little Q&A session, all right? So yeah, I'm going to stop here for today. But as we move into this week, since I have already talked about the distinction between judgment and discernment, try your best, try your darndest to move into this week with the intent of practicing discernment instead. So when you feel the urge or when you recognize the habituation coming up of wanting to judge something, see and observe that situation. See and observe and note down what are the triggers for you. Are there any particular physical signs, physical symptoms that you experience when you're about to engage in the act of judgment? Like, do you feel slightly excited? Do you feel slightly giddy when you're about to judge someone? Do you feel slightly happy that you're about to make a comparison between somebody and what you think that they should be, or what you think that they're supposed to be, or what you think that they ought to be? All right. So as we move into the week, practice mindfulness and be aware. and observe and see when you are about to fall into the act of judgment, and see when you're about to reinforce the habituation of judgment, all right? And then next week, I'm going to talk about how we can stop that so that we have 2 weeks of judgment, all right? Before I go, let's quickly scroll through. Cripes, I'm hungry. Quickly scroll through. Okay, so only question so far was from Joyce. Joyce? Yeah, Joyce asking if I'm burning incense. So yes, yeah, I answered that. I am burning incense to Vajrayogini. I will explain that Vajrayogini next week. Okay, so yeah, before I go, just some quick reminders. There is the Dojo Shukden Sadhana at 10 p.m. tonight on the Kechara, Chinese Kechara Facebook fan page. So if you guys have any requests for prayers or for dedications or offerings to be made, you can leave a comment on the bottom of this live stream. All right. Then on Tuesday at 9:30, there's Easy Dharma for the New Normal by Pastor David. Excuse me. As well as on Thursday at 8 p.m, there is the Tsem Rinpoche Swift Return Prayer, which is on the Kecharians and Friends Facebook group. So if you guys haven't joined that group, please do join that group. And we will be starting, or rather resuming, updates very soon on the Tsem Rinpoche Relic Stupa news group. So if you haven't joined that group either, please do join that group. And final reminder, if you haven't signed up for the Tsem Rinpoche Mantra recitation retreat, please do that. Get in touch with the front desk as soon as possible, all right? Don't forget to do your dedications. I'll do mine as soon as this live stream is over. Thank you guys so much for joining me this week. And yeah, I will see you same time, same place next week. Sunday, 10 a.m. I still forget on this fan page, all right? So guys, have a good week. And thank you so much for joining me. Have a good Sunday and bye.